This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. In this episode, we're talking to Bram Govaerts, Director General of CIMMYT, or the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Centre. Bram is an award-winning agricultural scientist whose work is transforming subsistence farming into sustainable and productive systems across the globe. Today, live from CIMMYT in Mexico City, we'll explore how innovative agricultural approaches can simultaneously address many issues in developing regions. You'll hear about his innovative approach to combining scientific knowledge with farmers' wisdom, how nutritional initiatives are being embedded within agricultural programs, and what drives his passion for taking science to the farmer. Let's get into it. Bram, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So let's start. Where are we?
We are in Mexico, in the headquarters of CIMMYT, which is the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. But by now, we do much more than improving only maize and wheat.
Yeah, amazing. And so CIMMYT's based just on the outskirts of Mexico City. Why is it here?
So it is actually here because that was a place that was open. It was agricultural land, but then of course the city started to grow. And this was the place where 80 years ago, the Mexican government actually decided to give some land for Norman Borlaug to start some of his research work together with the University of Chapingo. So that's why we are in Texcoco.
And so tell me a little bit about your journey to becoming the Director General of CIMMYT. Can you share a little bit about what inspired you to work on agricultural innovation, but then how did you manage to find yourself here guiding, I think, over 700, maybe 1,000?
1,500
staff. Wow, that's amazing.
All over the world in different offices.
Okay.
Half of them, 700 here in Mexico.
Amazing.
They actually started when I was a young kid. I was interested in development cooperation.
Okay.
Worked voluntarily with an NGO.
Yeah.
And from there, I got interested actually in agriculture. I'm a city boy, so I had nothing to do with agriculture. My grandparents did some agriculture, but not really. But then understanding development cooperation, you learn very fast that agriculture is actually one of the drivers to get people out of poverty. Of course, the feeding the world aspect. And then I was lucky that I came for an exchange here with American Field Service here to Mexico, learned Spanish, went back home, did my university studies, and then one of my professors said, there's this cool research institute called CIMMYT. So if you go back on vacation to Mexico, you should visit. And that's where the real story started. Yeah, I had the privilege to work with CIMMYT as a postdoc, and then grew through the organization, working in North Africa, working in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, doing my PhD in Ethiopia. So a lot of international experience. And then was, during COVID, asked to take over as interim Director General, probably because everybody was thinking things are going to die anyway. So, luckily we didn't. And here we are today.
What does an average day look like for you?
Average day is quite intense.
Yeah.
Starts very early. Because of course we're a global organization, and I don't know whoever invented time zones, but if I find him, he or she better be careful. No, so time zones are complicated. We have big operations in South Asia, so we start early in the morning to capture some of those discussions, and it goes quite late. Typical day would start with having discussions on new projects, having discussions on the strategy, and of course check in with the chapter leads. We have 3 chapters: science and innovation chapter, a operations chapter, because we have impact in 80 countries, so that is logistically quite complex. And then we have an engagement chapter, which is actually a new chapter, because I'm convinced we need to do better if we want to reach more farmers, more consumers. We need to tell our story better, and we need to understand the theories of change. Where do we need to intervene with information better while we attract more investors, of course.
So you've got 1,500 scientists working around the world. You guys are a big, sophisticated operation of scientists driving significant change. And I think this is critical. Why is this now more important than ever?
I think it's more important than ever because the challenge has changed, but and has radically become more complicated. Because when CIMMYT started, it was basically about let's feed the world, and that meant let's give enough calories. Yeah, because back then we thought as long as you have energy, you will be fine. Now we know you need a bit more than that. You need diversified diet, you need a healthy diet, but also by now we know that natural resources are not infinite, right? They're finite. Water is a precious resource, energy is a precious resource. How we have been using energy results now in provoking climate problems, which is putting pressure on the crops. So actually, we now take a systems view. And of course, with climate change, with the energy crisis, with the biodiversity crisis, but also with the growing population that we want to feed healthy, our challenge is more important than ever. And we actually see it because since I was a DG, we have had to pull scientists now out of 4 conflict zones where war broke out, while my two predecessors, didn't have to pull anybody ever during their period of DG out of a war zone. So it shows that those countries that were not that fragile before are actually rapidly going into conflict situations globally.
So, over your career, you've applied lots of transformational change for farmers in many different countries. Can you maybe talk to me about a particular success story that stands out to you, something that really inspires you?
Yeah, I think I'm going to give 2 of those.
Okay.
Number one is
I like two. That means that we're making an impact.
we're making progress.
Yeah.
So, as a PhD student, that was actually when I was trying conservation agriculture practices in Ethiopia. Now,
Okay.
the plow comes from Ethiopia
Oh, wow.
originally. That's
Yeah.
the Maresha, right? So, there you go, trying to say no longer plow in the country that invented the plow. But what we could do was actually do permanent beds. And that was very close to what traditional farmers were actually
Yeah.
doing. As soon as we implemented that, and the day I could see from the hill like a wall of wheat instead of scattered wheat, that was huge impact. And then see that being taken up just from farmer to farmer in a whole kind of landscape, in a whole set of villages, that was huge impact.
So tell me, what does that mean day to day for those farmers?
That basically meant that they would only depend 3 months on food aid instead of 9. So that's still 3 months, but just by that agricultural intervention, we could take off 6 of the 9 months. More importantly, that means they were way less exposed to all kinds of abuses or all kinds of dependencies to get that food aid, right? Because that's a social issue, it's a personal, sometimes a personal safety issue, etc. And then maybe more abstract but equally important is CIMMYT has been working on drought tolerant maize. That is maize that actually took from our seed bank where we are sitting right now. There here we have 28,000 different accessions of maize, and some of those mazes have a gene, a characteristic that makes them more drought tolerant. So we used some of that. We crossed it naturally, like when you have a very smart woman and a handsome man, you make smart and handsome kids. That's what we do with maize.
Love it.
And so we did that. And now in 8.5 million hectares, there's drought tolerant maize in sub-Saharan Africa. And that meant during the last El Nino that we avoided losses that would have happened. Wouldn't that not be the kind of maize that those farmers would have planted, between 40 to 200%? So that is difference in yield thanks to that drought tolerant gene.
That's amazing. So before you were talking to me about the challenges since you've become DG in terms of how the world's changing, things are becoming more conflict driven, there's more challenges, more fragility. How have things evolved in agricultural sustainability since you began your work?
It's very interesting because actually when I started, sustainability was something we needed to promote, we needed to convince people about. I think right now sustainability in our world is quite well understood. I think now it's actually the shift to saying what does that mean for resilience? Because when I started, it was more like productivity, and we're going to keep doing the same, but we need to do it sustainable. I think today we're saying efficiency, productivity. That is not really what this is about. It's about a resilient, sufficient production of a system. So we need to understand the system and make that system work for us, rather than keep pushing input output, like the logic of if you put sufficient in, there will be coming more out. I think we have now understood that mid piece, the system doesn't work automatically like that, and keep driving efficiency is actually taking degrees of freedom out of our system, which is then creating those breakthroughs or those break points in the system that then create those conflicts.
One of the things you were talking about was, when CIMMYT started, it was often about thinking about the calories, thinking about the productivity, getting people calories. They were hungry people. We're now thinking and understanding things differently. We're seeing this broader nutrition challenge. We're seeing how do we think about all of those kinds of elements. So can you tell us a little bit about how is CIMMYT involved in these global nutrition initiatives and the innovation that's happening?
So actually, that's why we changed a bit of our mission. It's now about food and nutrition security, and it's about resilience and nutrition. Now, if you take nutrition and resilience, that basically means crop diversification. So the Center of Maize and Wheat is now saying there's areas where we need to grow less maize and less wheat. And there's diets where we need to make sure that people are not just eating maize, because that's actually not a healthy diet. But that probably means we need to diversify those cropping systems by bringing in millets, sorghums, chickpeas, beans on the one hand. On the other hand, we work a lot on how to process all those crops, how to cook, so to say, or pre-cooking, right? So to see how can it be processed for a tortilla, how can it be processed for ugali, how can it be processed, and the different varieties have different quality actually for that. While we also now will test any of our varieties, for example, that go out for wheat, if they are not high in zinc, we don't release them. So even if they have the highest potential yield, we would not release that variety to the world if it wouldn't also have high zinc content. So we are streamlining some of those nutritious thresholds as part of what success means. That wasn't the case in the past.
I know I had the chance to just visit a few of the labs here. It feels like this is a space I need to spend more time. But I noticed that they were thinking about not only what's in the different crops, but also how do people able to consume them? What's the availability or the bioavailability, and how do you then best present that also for marketability? So tell us a little bit more about why you're going down to those levels as well. Like, this is a center that was designed around production initially.
Because I think we are looking more and more around the impact we generate. So we have identified 5 areas where we want to make a difference, and that is climate change, biodiversity, but also nutritious diets and inclusivity. So if you look at that nutritious diet piece, if you work back from that, a lot happens when people actually eat, right? And a lot happens right before when people actually prepare. And that can either be because you buy prepared stuff like bread or pasta, but it can also be because you prepare and you make bread and you do, for example, like in Mexico, a traditional process like nixtamalization. And it was a few years ago that we said we need to understand why were farmers doing nixtamalization and what does it really mean. And it showed us that it frees up nutritious elements from the maize, but also it was actually a traditional practice that deactivated the aflatoxins that could come with the maize. Now, when we brought maize, we as humanity, to Africa, we didn't take nixtamalization from Mexico to Africa. So that means aflatoxins are actually a huge issue in the maize value chain in Africa. So that showed us is some of that traditional knowledge, we missed out on that. And we, as from with a scientific lens, we are now understanding that and translating that in industrial processes, but also cooking processes, and showing basically how can you transform maize and make it as nutritious and healthy as possible through some of the cooking techniques or some of the processing techniques.
And so we're obviously here in Mexico and this is the headquarters, but there's centers around. How does that kind of cultural conversation and the diversity of your team, I guess, come into also those improving those outcomes? Because you mentioned diversity is one of those elements.
It's actually quite fascinating. We have a very multicultural team.
Yeah.
In CIMMYT, there's over 55 different nationalities working together. We all have our background. Many of us actually have a relationship to wheat and maize because that's one of the 2 big crops, and then rice, of course. So we are using that common factor of you may come from a different culture, but probably your breakfast included either maize or wheat. So we have a kind of a common ground. But we do a lot of effort around how can your background be a plus or contribute to a more diverse conversation. On the other hand, it also means we have to do a lot of effort around one common mental model, right? Because we're all working on one mission. And I think by shifting some of the conversation to what we want to provoke, better diets, more inclusion, that actually allowed us to say that's our shared mental model, having a positive impact on that. How you get there, there may be different roads to Rome, or there may be different ways you get that impact. And that brings up better ideas, that brings up the innovation. So we have also shifted from a science organization to a science and innovation organization, because science is the rigor process of saying, I have a hypothesis, I either confirm or deny, right? While innovation is more about, I have a conversation, I have a set of ideas, can I bundle this in a new breakthrough? So we're also shifting as an organization towards that science and innovation piece. And I think it's the multiculturality, it's the fact that we have different nationalities around the table, different backgrounds, that actually helps with that innovation piece.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And hearing about some of the shifts, I guess you've also been thinking about the changing climate. You're thinking about
Absolutely.
the environmental sustainability. And talk to me a little bit about how do you balance those improving nutrition with environmental sustainability? Because it's a challenge, because, how do you get that?
We need to be comfortable with trade-offs, right? Because this a system de facto is trade-off.
Yep.
So you cannot always maximize for everything at the same time. So I think it's finding that middle piece that is where you don't go over the red line, but you actually stay and try to move each of those 5 impact areas. So environmental sustainability, we are very clear that we have 5 strategic objectives. One of them is it needs to stay within the sustainability of the agri-food system. So even if we can drive livelihoods to improvement, if it goes outside of that carrying capacity of your agri-food system, we will course correct. So what that actually means is we have set up better data systems to have very rapid feedback loops in order that we can course correct wherever needed. So we will identify indicators that actually go off as kind of an alarm system saying this may be going into the right direction for one of the impacts that you want to generate, but it's going into the wrong direction because it's having negative consequences on water or on soil pollution or on, so then we will immediately course correct. And that is one of the learnings of the green revolution, right? So we did an analysis of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the green revolution. The green revolution had an assignment, which is feed billions of people through calories. It had negative impacts on water, it had negative impacts on nitrogen use, it probably had negative impacts on diversity. Rather than criticizing that, which is easy, yeah, and what I always say is be careful, because maybe 50 years from now, people with much more knowledge than we have today are going to say, at least, or one of two of our decision, what a silly decision was this. But we took it with the information we have today. You take the best decisions with the information that is available. But what we're trying to do is to have maximum information available and not wait 50 years to then say what's the good, the bad, and the ugly, but rather say what's the good and the bad, the ugly of yesterday. And the bad and the ugly, can we course correct it before it damages or has an unintended consequence?
Yeah. I think it's so important to understand those relationships. And I think it sounds like the strategy has been adapting and innovating and really moving forward in really positive ways. But I think the way that you were just describing, it's very easy to make judgments when you don't have all the information or you don't know what's happened in the past or what those consequences were. What has been some of the most challenging areas or aspects of implementing some of this agriculture depending on different contexts? Because you've mentioned conflict, but what else is really challenging to actually take the science that's being done and then actually get it out there?
It's that tension between, we have the advantage of being a global organization, so we can confront circumstances, we can extract learnings from that at a higher level. But in the end, agriculture is site specific. So, how do you get to scale in such a site specific environment? So, that's also probably why we're putting more attention around understanding how people adopt, how people learn, how systems scale. And some of those things have nothing to do with rational decisions. Some of those decisions are irrational or emotional decisions. So that's where I think we are on a path to learn, how can you use other advocates? Is it the chef? Is it the storyteller? Is it a local theater group? And it's not that all of a sudden CIMMYT's going to do theater, but it's looking at, should our information be used by a theater group and say something about nutrition, right? So an interesting thing is one of our big successes was when we could convince a theater group here in Mexico that was going village to village to actually talk about conservation agriculture. And that was the biggest hit. And there we had thousands of leaflets with scientific information, which nobody was reading, but the theater did the trick. So it's understanding some of those scaling challenges and the local adaptation, which also means we need to empower people to take decisions. It is not about saying, this is the recipe. It's about saying, these are the elements, these are the ingredients, up to you to make an agronomic wise decision for your soil, for your family, for your farm, right? And that is difficult to do, because that means you need to have the knowledge, but you also need to have the empowerment and the training of the decision makers along the whole system.
So out of all the work that you're doing at the moment, what are you most excited about?
I'm most excited about the work that we're doing right now on actually making our data, our information available for all decision makers. Be it, we're very active in making sure that, for example, high-level decision makers in the UN Security Council know that what the importance is of food security to avoid conflict. We have been invited to put information to decision makers to make a country strategy around healthy diets locally produced. But also we're using decision tools that uses 70 years of CIMMYT data for a farmer, for her to decide which variety or which fertilizer to use. Personally, I'm very excited about the power of injecting and empowering wise decision making through making data and information available that was previously sitting probably only on scientists' computers, and that resulted in science products, while today it results in better decision making. That's one I personally am extremely excited about.
And that data is so critical for informed decision making and really understanding the impact. And then the data also feeds back into a loop, because you can collect more information on impacts. And we have
a system, for example, right now of information from 48,000 different farmers.
Wow.
Just what they do, like when did they plant, when did they harvest, what was the yield. That now becomes information to feed back to other farmers to take better decisions. But we have also used it for strategic planning for the country. So the same data makes an individual making a better decision somewhere in a village. At the same time, it has helped the president of that country to make better decisions around the strategic direction of the agricultural sector of the country.
So one question that I often like to close interviews out is one that I guess we can all relate to. What do you enjoy eating?
What do I enjoy eating? I enjoy eating a lot. I think meals are extremely important. My ideal day is a day off where you can have an eternally long breakfast with a nice newspaper, not a physical one many times on the phone, but still it feels like a newspaper. So food is very important. There's nothing more important than sitting with family or friends, have a nice long dinner, not one where you're just in 15 minutes trying to functionally eat, but one where you enjoy. So I enjoy many cuisines, but I must say the Mexican cuisine is very diverse. Anywhere you go, there's a specialty, there's a different thing you try. Sometimes it's too spicy for me, but even that, there's nothing more fun than being crying because you're eating something so spicy but so nice.
So what's the favorite Mexican dish?
Or my favorite Mexican dish would be simple tacos, which is like the Mexican, but real Mexican tacos from blue tortillas, not white tortillas. Like tortillas from the original native maize varieties.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for letting me be here at CIMMYT.
Now, come back anytime, and I think you need to explore some more, to learn some more, and make maybe a few other podcasts with some of the fantastic scientists we have here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.